Welcome to the Consistency Project Podcast. I am Patrick Cummings, here as always with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week we aim to simplify the principles and practices of nutrition, health, and fitness. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, E.C. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. We're going to talk about fasting. I feel like we haven't talked about this for a while. So we're going to talk about fasting, and specifically fasting as it relates to inflammation. So I'm excited to get into this. This is kind of like an old school topic for us. So we're going to get back into it. Before we jump in, quick mention. As you know, the holiday season is coming up fast, which means holiday parties, desserts, and all those foods that might throw you off track. It's been a challenge for you in the years past. EC's got you covered with her December accountability group inside the 3 Pillars Method app. You'll focus on the 800-gram challenge throughout December, which is perfect because it still gives you the flexibility to enjoy all those holiday treats without letting your diet completely go off of the rails. EC will be running Q&A sessions, live streams, and there'll be some fun prizes along the way. I'm interested to see what that is. You can jump in if you're interested, optimizemenutrition.com/December. It's $397 for the entire year of app access, or you can jump into the $39 a month payment plan if you would like to go that way. Again, optimizemenutrition.com/December. All right. Fasting and inflammation. What are we talking about? Why are we talking about it?
Fasting lore.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of fasting lore.
It lingers. It continues.
Yeah, I mean, I think our oldest video together is like a fasting video, right, on the CrossFit.
Yep. Yeah, so long ago. We were basically children, and yes.
Yeah. So still talking about fasting decades later.
We didn't solve it with that one video, so we're back again.
No, we're tackling it head on today, and we're tackling the idea that fasting decreases inflammation, therefore good.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's definitely some accepted dogma by fasting zealots, and I should say that I was one for a period of time too. So a lot of these things that I say don't do, I did, and so I understand. But yeah, it's because of this supposed decrease in inflammation that this is part and parcel with the belief that fasting leads to greater longevity. And what we've tried to tease about before on prior episodes is that a lot of the benefit from fasting simply comes from creating a caloric deficit and achieving a healthy weight. And I've also tried to point out that fasting in an extreme caloric deficit is not actually a good longevity play, because unlike mice in severe caloric restriction existing in germ-free cages, we as humans need adequate nutrition to have strong bones, a strong immune system to survive in kind of this real world. Nevertheless, there is this belief that even without weight loss, fasting is beneficial. And that's also how time-restricted feeding or time-restricted eating kind of came to be. It's this notion, okay, you don't need to lose weight. That's not what we're talking about. Now just eat within these certain time periods, eat all the calories that you're supposed to get, but eat them within these certain time periods, and you're going to get this benefit from fasting again because this fasting period decreases inflammation, therefore good. Mm-hmm. Now, we've certainly talked about before one of the problems with that type of statement is that inflammation can be a good thing. Inflammation is this immune system response, and it's not inherently bad because our immune system is a good thing. Like inflammation goes up when you have a cold, and that's because your immune system is fighting off that viral infection. That's a good thing. I also love the example that exercise is inflammatory. I think exercise, thankfully, is inherently accepted as a good thing, yet it makes inflammation go up. And so the key there with the examples that I just gave are it makes inflammation go up in the short term. And so inflammation, always going down is not necessarily a good thing because you're going to die without it. So the pro-fasting argument is, okay, no, we're not talking about, decreasing inflammation in the sense of exercise. We're talking about decreasing inflammation that's associated with all these chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. And one of the big mechanisms they talk about a lot here related to those chronic diseases of, okay, this is the type of inflammation that we're going to decrease, is the inflammation associated with what's known as autophagy. Now, autophagy is cell cleanup, and basically it's when parts of damaged cells are destroyed. And autophagy cleanup tends to increase when we don't have a lot of nutrients around. And this is kind of a really oversimplified premise, but basically by reducing the calories that are around, the cells function more on this cleanup mode and repair mode, and that's how we're going to reduce inflammation. It's getting rid of these damaged parts, so then the immune system's not sending all these signals about the damaged parts, and that's how we're going to reduce the inflammation that we see. We're going to come back to that and kind of tease out some of the reality there. But it's really this cell cleanup idea that people really hang their hat on of the benefit of fasting, even if it doesn't have weight loss. So again, this is like when people say, no, it's going to decrease inflammation and I can eat all of my calories within this restricted window. And there's some benefit of me making sure that I go for a period of, let's say, 16 hours without eating. It's often because of this cell cleanup idea, this decreasing inflammation related to chronic disease idea that's giving you these extra health benefits above and beyond just maintaining a healthy weight. And so really a couple studies that I kind of came across recently, I think tackle that head on.
Got it. So this is like a multivitamin for our cells. It's like, yeah, maybe it'll be useful. Okay, maybe. Great. So let's talk maybe about those studies and give us a little bit of background about what they were looking for, and what they found.
Yeah. Okay. So the first new review article that came out was looking at long-term fasting and inflammatory markers. And I don't think fasting zealots will like the outcome, but I think we also need to be careful to draw too many conclusions from it, even though they might not like it. I don't necessarily think it's the final nail in the fasting coffin. I just think it was an interesting one. But anyway, it's this scoping review. And a scoping review basically tries to summarize existing research on a topic, trying to identify where are there gaps for future research. So it's not as powerful as some of the meta-analyses or the systematic reviews that we talk about all the time. This is definitely more preliminary. It's sort of saying, hey, what's been done? Do we have enough data to really say anything conclusive? So they were looking at studies with long-term fasting again, and specifically 48 hours or more, and what happens to inflammatory markers in that duration. And sort of the surprising outcome, which the authors even note is contrary to popular belief, is that that duration length of fasting led to an increase in inflammatory markers. Now, we do have to pause there a little bit to make sure that people are going to make the right kind of takeaway or conclusion from this. This was looking at fasts for 48 hours or more. So we cannot take this finding and say, okay, this is true at 47 hours, or this is true at 24 hours, or this is true for my 16-hour overnight fast. So even though this preliminary scoping review found that, quote, fasting increases inflammation, please don't get, freaked out that this is going to be true for shorter fasts. We are meant to have overnight fasts. Like 16-hour fasts really aren't fast even. They're just sort of normal living going between dinner and breakfast, right? This is not, do not get freaked out with this finding. And so I just really want to make sure that people aren't kind of extrapolating the results out of turn. But I do think we as a culture, and I think we even talked about this on one of our prior podcasts, that we have this, I think, inherent notion that fasting has some sort of mechanism related to cleansing, your purification. I think it's one of these deeply held human beliefs that I think if you were just to sort of poll anyone casually about fasting and like, oh, is a long fast good for health? I think most people would sort of just agree and say yes, when this finding is saying completely the opposite. Now, the other big limiting thing I want to point out about this study is they were just measuring inflammatory markers. And this is something that we've definitely harped on before, that I don't like to look at inflammatory markers and then say, okay, I know what's going to happen in terms of death and disease, because that's extrapolating past the data. So we can't just look at this study and say, okay, well, inflammatory markers went up at 48 hours and therefore these people are now going to have a heart attack, or therefore these people are now going to have a chronic disease. We can't do that. Inflammation, again, goes up and down all the time. So this actually isn't a study I would normally bring up because it doesn't actually look at outcomes like death and disease that we talk about. But because there's so much of this accepted dogma that fasting decreases inflammation, therefore good, and this is exactly the opposite of that, it was certainly of interest to kind of bring it into the mix.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I think you mentioned that there were two studies. Is there does it make sense to bring in the second one?
Yeah, the second one is really the banger here as far as PubMed studies go. And it's this Templeman study in the show notes. It came out in 2021. I'm really kind of bummed I didn't see it till now. And so that's how fun, I guess fun in quotes, this can be, because I'll be researching the new article and then run into something that came out before. But anyway, it was a randomized control trial, and they were really trying to isolate the effects of fasting versus just weight loss, which is sort of this topic that we've been circling around for some time. Now, let's get the limitations out of the way for this study. It was only 3 weeks long, not very long, and it was only 36 people, not very big. So, okay, we can't make these huge, broad, sweeping conclusions, of course, for everybody, but nevertheless, it's a great study directly on the topic that we're interested in. Now, what's also super interesting about this study is they actually used lean, healthy people. And I liked this population for the specific reason that I often have people believing fasting has this independent health benefit, even if they're already at that healthy weight. And so the fact that they use this population is really going to be good for, let's say, our audience who wants to kind of keep working on that further optimization, because that's exactly the population that they're looking at here. So what they did is they took the test subjects and they divided them into 3 groups. Group 1, they ate in a 25% caloric deficit with no fasting. So let's just suppose that the people in this group 1, their maintenance number of calories, the number of calories to maintain their weight's 2,000 calories a day. So what they did with them is they said, okay, each day you're just going to eat 1,500 calories per day. So they could eat whenever they want. They weren't forced to fast. They were just doing a standard caloric deficit of 25% deficit every day. Okay, that's group 1. Group 2 also would get a 25% caloric deficit, but they would combine it with every other day fasting. So kind of using the same numbers, that caloric deficit for these people would still be that 1,500 calorie target to put them in a caloric deficit. But then to combine it with every other day fasting, that means that group 2 is eating 3,000 calories every other day.
Got it.
So it's the same deficit, but now they have this 24-hour block where they're not eating in between kind of when they're eating. Okay, so group 3 then, they are just eating at maintenance, no deficit, but they are going to fast. So this group, again, using the same numbers, let's say their maintenance is still the 2,000 calories per day. They're now, because they're combining with fasting, they're eating 4,000 calories every other day.
Got it. So they're still doing the 24 on,
Yep,
24 off.
exactly. They're doing the 24 hours on, 24 hours off, but they don't have a caloric deficit. So group 1 and 2 have that same caloric deficit, but one of them did it with 24-hour fast. And so if fasting had some inherent benefit above cutting calories, the group that is doing the deficit plus the fasting would have better results. And then the group 3, this maintenance group, they're very much like the time-restricted feeding idea. They're eating at maintenance, but again, if fasting was so great without a caloric deficit, then they would also improve their markers or whatever results we're measuring from their baseline, because their baseline, they weren't fasting. And so this is really, again, a great way to try to tease out, is fasting doing anything besides creating a caloric deficit? And then they measured a ton of stuff from like weight and body composition to biomarkers like fasting glucose to some biomarkers that we don't really talk about a lot in the sense of measurements of autophagy and inflammation with other biomarkers.
Since we want to maybe talk about inflammation, as we said at the top here, and because everybody listening always is interested in body composition, so what was the result? Like what did they find?
Yeah, we first got to tackle body comp. We'll get to inflammation, but are they leaner?
Yeah, let's get right to what everybody cares
about.
about.
The clicks. Okay, this is really great. So the 2 groups that were in that caloric deficit lost the same amount of weight. It didn't matter if you did a regular caloric deficit of hitting 1,500 calories every day, or you combined it with the fast, doing 3,000 calories every other day, you lost the same amount of weight. About 3 pounds, it turns out, across these 3 weeks. Now, the caloric deficit group, the people who did the boring, same old caloric deficit, they're the group that lost the most fat mass. So when we look at the group that combined the caloric deficit with the fast, their body composition was a little bit worse off. They lost more lean mass than the group that just did the standard caloric deficit. So if anything, again, combining a caloric deficit with a 24-hour fast led to worse body composition. Now, again, these are pretty kind of extreme fasts. I don't know that I have that many people who are trying to do this style of dieting, but nevertheless, it does show for us that body composition is not inherently better when you do a caloric deficit plus fasting.
It's really interesting. Okay, so maybe now let's jump into the biomarker measurements, the inflammation. What did the study say about those?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is definitely where I wish I had kind of seen the study back when it came out. But again, they were looking at some classic markers of inflammation and then some of these measurements of autophagy, basically whether or not various cellular processes are happening. And they were looking at the expression of them in fat tissue between these diet groups. And lo and behold, there was no difference between the groups, meaning the groups who fasted did not show less inflammation or more autophagy. In other words, fasting did not have a unique benefit above and beyond caloric restriction. And I think what helps highlight this is that autophagy and inflammation, it's really important that people understand there aren't these things that you personally like turn on and off by deciding when to eat. Like autophagy is happening even when you aren't in a caloric deficit. It's happening right now for people. And that's what this is really telling us, that you don't have to go into these periods of fasting to have autophagy in your body. Same thing with inflammation. It's not just sort of like, okay, by not eating for the next 4 hours, I'm going to stop inflammation. Like they are going to happen in your body regardless. Now, you do have some influence over them by way of diet and exercise, especially when we start to look at, are you eating the right total quantity of food, which we certainly talked about before, but it's not this sort of simple day-to-day thing like I'm going to not eat for 12 hours and therefore autophagy off. It's just, that's too simple way to think about it. The other thing that I kind of want to tease out here is we've definitely talked about how weight loss can be anti-inflammatory because fat itself is a source of inflammation. Yep. So here, what's interesting is even though there was some weight loss, there was about 3 pounds with that caloric restriction, I said that the inflammatory markers were not different in the groups. And it's probably because 3 pounds in an already lean population doesn't really have these significant anti-inflammatory benefits. Like they're already in a healthy range anyway, that losing 3 pounds, they're not all of a sudden more anti-inflammatory. They're already a healthy weight and then 3 pounds is still there. So they're kind of the same as they were before. Where conversely, if we were to take somebody who's in an overweight range and then reduce them down to a healthy weight range, we would see a decrease in inflammation. But that's not here because, again, the subject population was already a healthy weight to begin with. And then the same thing for looking at biomarkers like blood glucose. There was no difference in fasting glucose or cholesterol even between the groups. And it's, again, because they were likely, or they are, lean and healthy to start. They didn't lose that much weight. They didn't have really anywhere to optimize. And I bring it up because we get a lot of people who are interested in this optimization at all costs. And I really try to encourage people that once you're within a healthy range, there is no more optimization to be had. And this study really shows that these people are maybe adding on fasting to their diet and thinking that it has some additional benefit. Like maybe I'll get my fasting insulin a little bit lower, or maybe I'll get my fasting glucose a little bit lower. And it doesn't really matter. You're already in a healthy range, and this is showing that there was no significant difference by just adding that fasting thing. And so I like to kind of hopefully bring, I don't know, peace or comfort to people. It's like you can stop tinkering with nutrition. When you get into the healthy weight range and you're eating lots of fruits and veggies and all the stuff that we talk about all the time, you can stop with all these wacky protocols. You don't need to always be fasting on top of managing your calories, or I don't know, staring at the sun in the morning, or measuring your glucose with every meal, or all this other stuff that we talk about. Like you're kind of can be just done.
Are there any other takeaways from you, having looked at this? You said a couple times you wish you'd seen this years ago when it came out. Any big takeaways that we haven't hit on yet worth mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, I always like to remind people that I'm not against fasting per se. It can be a simple way that people create a caloric deficit. I just like people to know that it's not this panacea. It's not your ticket to longevity. But I do think there's some great benefits of fasting simply by way of people experiencing the fact that you can be hungry for a period of time and it's okay, or you can miss a meal and it's okay. I think we also gotten a little bit too sensitive to that. So I think it can be a great way that people kind of get out of that mindset about constantly eating, or just know that hunger is a natural feeling and it's okay to experience it. But in terms of bringing you this, I don't know, additional health above and beyond just eating proper quantity and quality, it does not. And really also like to remind people that when we look at what drives longevity in some of these cultures and populations, there's so many other things to focus on besides like adding some wacky fasting schedule on your nutrition. It's like, go pick up a new sport, right? Go find a new hobby, go connect with people in your community, all this other stuff that I think will really pay off for longevity versus doing these, 24-hour every other day fast type of approaches.
Yeah. It's almost like people say, hey, I want to do this for longevity, but really what they're saying is I want to do this for optimization. And those two things aren't the same thing, but they think that they are.
Great point. Yeah, they think they are, exactly. But yeah, we don't have the literature to suggest that. And this is a great study that says like, nope, not that at all.
Okay, I think the last question I have for you is, one of the key features of the 3 pillars method is that it's not restrictive. why is that better than something like fasting? Or why would you recommend that versus something like fasting, which is obviously kind of inherent in that is a degree of restriction?
Yeah, I mean, I ultimately like to tell people what to eat because it's the quality and quantity of the nutrients that dictate the outcomes they want. Like fasting, it's way more, I don't want to say luck, but it's just sort of a little bit more open to chance what's going to happen when you choose to eat, whether or not
Got
you
it.
eat
Yep.
the right total quality, whether you eat the right total quantity. Let's just sort of hope it comes together with the foods that you want to choose when you eat. Where instead it's like, well, if you want to lose weight, we have to control calories. If you want to be focused more on like health and performance, we have to look at some quality too. So why don't we just focus on what nutrients we're eating versus kind of doing a tangential variable to that. And so to me, focusing on like the actual foods to eat is just a more direct path to the outcome that people want.
Yep, right on. All right, two things before we go. First, just a reminder, if you want to jump into that December accountability group, head to optimizemenutrition.com/December today, and we'll put that link in the show notes for folks if you want it. And then two, if you're listening and not yet subscribed wherever you are listening or watching this, do make sure you hit that button so you don't miss another episode. EC and I will be back next week for a brand new episode of the Consistency Project podcast.